So we established that TypeScript is JavaScript with a type system, but let's talk more about what that type system is or what that actually means. TypeScript performs something called static checking, which is a feature of a lot of programming languages. It basically means that it's going to look to detect any errors in our code without running it. It doesn't actually execute our code. That is the job of JavaScript. TypeScript itself is a static checker. It looks at our code and it tells us if it sees anything ahead of time, before runtime. So that's called static checking. Now, TypeScript is a static type checker, which means that it does this error checking, this pre-runtime checking on the basis of types or the kinds of data in our program. It knows something is a string, something is a number, something is an array, something is an object that has this particular set of properties. And it does all of this pre-runtime. And I'll show an example of this in just a moment, a very simple one. But let's just talk about why this matters. The main reason this matters is that it helps us find errors. And most importantly, it helps us find errors before our code even runs. It analyzes what we're doing as we type, only in development, and it will find these issues before we ever do anything else, before the code is even run in a browser. And then the workflow that we use with TypeScript is we type our TypeScript code, we look at any errors, we hopefully fix any errors that it identifies, and then the code is compiled to regular JavaScript that can run in a browser or that Node.js can work with. So TypeScript is there for development purposes, but then it is compiled to JavaScript. So here's an example. I'll show you this website in the next section, but I've got TypeScript on the left and the compiled JavaScript on the right. Any JavaScript syntax is 100% valid in TypeScript. So, I can do things like basic math, 1 + 1, but I'm not actually executing this code. I'm not getting to anywhere. If I did a console.log, nothing is printed out. This is just JavaScript compiled from my TypeScript. And sometimes the code that we write looks exactly like JavaScript, but TypeScript actually provides a lot of additional type stuff that we can write in our code that will not exist in the compiled JavaScript. So take a look at the left side here. We've got a lot of extra syntax, a lot of extra lines. What is that? 50 lines of code of TypeScript, but it's actually compiled down to like 8 lines of JavaScript. So there's a bunch of extra stuff. There's keywords in here like interface, type. That doesn't exist in JavaScript anywhere. Interface chicken extends bird interface. This is all TypeScript specific stuff that we use in development to help us write better, safer code that is all eventually stripped out when our code makes it to JavaScript, when it's compiled. So when I said that it checks our errors as we're typing, it acts as somebody looking over our shoulder saying, hey, bud, what are you doing with that code? Let me show you an example. If you recall, in the previous video, we did something like this, right? We had this shape that had a width of 10, a height of 23. It's an object. And then I tried to calculate the area, and I had a tiny typo. I had th for height instead of height. And so area is set to nan because shape.height doesn't exist. We get undefined. Now, if I took this code and just copied and pasted it directly into TypeScript, I'm going to get a warning. I get an error right here. This error says property height does not exist on this type. Did you mean height? So it doesn't stop me from doing this. If you look at the compiled JavaScript, it has my error in it, or the misspelling, the typo. But TypeScript did its best to look at my code and identify any problems, by the way, before this code has ever run. I haven't run anything yet. I'm just looking at the feedback I'm getting from TypeScript. And then I could identify, all right, that was a problem. Let's fix that and spell it correctly. So a very tiny, simple example, but it illustrates the point of TypeScript. Its goal is to help us find errors before our code ever runs. And as I said earlier, it's a superset of JavaScript, meaning that everything in JavaScript is valid in TypeScript, plus a bunch of extra syntax that is TypeScript specific that has to do with types. And we saw an example of that in this window here. We're going to learn all about these keywords and interfaces and discriminated unions and all this stuff that exists only in TypeScript. But as you can see, a lot of code gets boiled down to some plain old JavaScript. So the bulk of this course is about understanding all this non-JavaScript stuff that TypeScript adds in that we can use to help us in development. And with that said, Let's start learning some of that. So we're going to have to start by installing things, but it's actually a very easy installation.